Good day, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today because today we are going to talk about the area of comparative linguistics, which focuses on the comparison of two or more languages to determine the differences or similarities between them. I am referring to contrastive analysis hypothesis. More about contrastive analysis hypothesis is that it implies a belief in language universals, where if there were no features in common, then there would be no basis for comparison. But it is given that there are variety of languages across the universe, and each of that languages differs from each other. That's why we need to study its differences and similarities in order to acquire more languages. Furthermore, it highlights the similarities and difference of L1 and L2. It also seeks to predict and explain L2's learners' difficulty problems. And those difficulty problems involves the presence of our native language or our L1. So before we dig deep into contrastive analysis hypothesis, first, let us talk about the foundation of the CAH. So contrastive analysis hypothesis was very popular in the year 1960s. It was pioneered by Dr. Roberto Lado. So he stated that we can predict and describe the patterns that will cause difficulty in learning and those that will not cause difficulty by comparing systematically the language and culture to be learned with the native language and culture of the students. Therefore, he suggested or he stated that our culture and our language is somehow entwined together. So in contrastive analysis hypothesis, these are the three claims of CAH. First, we have the strong version. Second, we have the weak version. And third, we have the moderate version. So, strong version can be understood by this structure. So, with the difference between L1 and L2 item, there will be an interference of L1 into L2 that causes difficulty in learning L2. And that language interference is the effect of a language learner's first language under production of the language, their learning or their target language. And that effect can be in any aspect. It could be the grammar, the vocabulary, the accent, the spelling, and so on. And this perspective leads to the idea of the negative and the positive transfer. So, negative transfer is when the influence of the native language differs from the use of the target language, while in the positive transfer is when the influence of the native language leads to immediate acquisition due to its similarities. So that is the strong version. Next, we have the weak version. So, due to limited knowledge of L2, there will be a recourse to L1, which also causes difficulty in learning L2. So, of course, what's difficult for the learners to learn is something he does not know yet because the difficulty in learning L2 in the weak version is all about the limited knowledge or the limited source of the L2. That's why it is difficult for us to learn L2 due to our lack of knowledge or lack of idea about what we are learning. So finally, we have the moderate version. So moderate version is based on the research about spelling errors. So those spelling errors could lead to difficulty in learning L2. So, and rather than causing difficulty, so the difference between L1 and L2 are more likely to be noticed and categorized. So this perspective is based on the specialization of the principle of the stimulus generalization. So it is a subtle difference between the other claim of CAH, which is the strong version and the weak version. Again, what causes the difficulty in learning L2 in the moderate version is the spelling errors. And it is more likely to be difficult for people whose native language uses a Roman script. For example, is the French and the Spanish, than those people whose native language are non-Roman script. For example, Arabic, Japanese, and Chinese. So, the three claims of CAH is a very essential tool or a very essential analysis. But despite all that, there are still criticisms about CAH. But despite of the criticisms of CAH, it is still an important tool in each school for effective second language in learning and in teaching. Now, in the year 1970, Wardow proposes the idea of the strong versus the weak version of the contrastive analysis hypothesis, where in the strong version, it is identified as a priori prediction. So, CAH can predict and describe the linguistic patterns that causes difficulty in learning. So, for example, the similarities is identified as easy, which is equivalent to positive transfer, while in the differences between L1 and L2 identified as the difficult one, which is equivalent to the negative transfer. On the other hand, in the weak version, rather than a prediction, it is a posteriori explanation, where CAH can explain difficulties and errors, but not all errors. We are down to the third part of our discussion, and this is the procedures for comparing languages. And these procedures involves 5 different steps. First, we have the description. So before the selection of certain linguistic items, structures, or rules, the two languages are explicitly described in question. So in this step, we are going to describe the L1 items and the L2 items. And the two languages should be described through the same linguistic model or framework. For example, our L1 is described according to communicative theory. Now, our L2 also should be described according to communicative theory in order to identify the similarities and differences in that specific field. So second, we have the selection. So comprehensive comparison of two languages for pedagogical purposes is neither feasible nor necessary. So generally, in this step, we are going to select items or structures that does not exist in our native language or our L1 but existed in the second language or our L2 and vice versa. So third, we have the comparisons. So the subsystems of the two languages are juxtaposed in order to find similarities between them. So in this step, we are going to compare and contrast those items which was previously selected. So next, we have the prediction. So predictions are made about difficulties learners may come across in acquiring L2. So these are the similarities and differences found through the comparison of the languages should be judged to see if there are problematic for the learners or not. So in this step, we are going to predict what will be difficult for the learners to learn and what is not. So last, we have the verification. So in this step, we are going to find out whether the predictions that we have made about errors and difficulties are actually materialized or not. So those predictions, now in this step, we are going to verify if those prediction that we have made is actually fact or actually accepted or not. Now, contrastive analysis hypothesis can be summarized and understood according to these ideas. First, if L1 and L2 are similar, then there will be no problems learning in L2 structure because L1 and L2 items are the same. Second, if L1 and L2 are different, then yes, there will be problems learning L2 structures because we are going to compare those differences, and those differences will lead into the interference of learning the L2. So lastly, if L2 had something L1 did not, then yes, there will be problems learning L2 structure because it will be difficult for us to learn items in L2 that does not exist in our native language, and it would be difficult also in acquiring L2 if there are items that are lacking in our native language but does exist in L2. And that would be all for today. Thank you for listening, guys, and have a great day ahead. Thank you.